I'm Polly Jones. I'm the head of Scotland for the Trussell Trust. The Trussell Trust supports over 130 food bank centres across Scotland to deliver food parcels, but we also deliver programmes to reduce the need for charitable food aid and campaign to end the need for food banks altogether. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Shirley-Anne Somerville MSP, who was appointed as Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice in March 2023, just earlier this year.
It's a pleasure to be with you here this afternoon, and it does allow us to have the opportunity to discuss something that's very important to government, and I know very important to all of you, and that's to really tackle head-on the fact that we still have a nation that has members of our communities that are relying on food banks day in, day out. And I was pleased to announce very recently the Scottish Government's approach to tackling the end of food banks and our cash-first approach, because for me, one thing is absolutely clear. Food banks, and particularly the volunteers who run them, do an amazing job within our communities. There are people who literally depend upon them week in and week out. But they are a sign of a system that has failed. They are not part of a system. And that's a very important distinction that we always need to remind ourselves of, is how do we get away from the reliance on food banks and move to actually having a social security system and safety nets within our country that makes the need for food banks end. But unfortunately, as we all know in this room, there is a need for food banks for many people in our society. Now, we are determined to use our powers to make a difference. The Cash First plan that we have sets out 9 collaborative actions that we will take alongside you over the next 3 years to help reduce that need for emergency food parcels. And one of the really important things that we can all do to help achieve this reduction, and that's why it's in the title of the plan, is to improve access to emergency cash payments as the first response to a financial crisis. That cash-first approach means that people can choose the food and other essentials that best meets their needs and their preferences. And we know that when this is delivered, particularly alongside money advice to strengthen people's income, it can help to prevent future hardship. But it is an important aspect that we need to look at, is how we provide a system that gives people dignity on their hardest of times. Now, the £1.8 million Cash First programme is one of the key actions in the plan that will drive this forward. Over the next 2 years, the programme will support public and third sector collaborations in 8 areas to improve access to cash grants for food and other essentials, including a range of pilot interventions. That programme will help us generate the evidence that can inform future policy and practice to improve how we respond to crisis. And one of the other aspects which is very important, as well as making sure that our approach assists everyone in our society. And that's why one of the other actions is to invest in the British Red Cross to deliver an inclusive cash-first approach through the Scottish Crisis Fund. And that is available to anyone at risk of destitution, including those with no recourse to public funds, who, of course, because of the rules from the UK government, many of us cannot support in the way that we would like to do. Now, we're continuing to work with local advice services to pilot the use of cash grants and shopping cards as an alternative to a food bank referral. This builds on learning which has already gone on, for example, in some citizens' advice bureaus, which has showed that this can have a financial gain for those who took up, in particularly, the linked money advice, as well as that emergency provision. We have, of course, maintained the value of the Scottish Welfare Fund and are working to deliver the improvements that have been set out in the action plan. But over the past 6 years, we've invested £733 million in discretionary housing payments and the Scottish Welfare Fund. Often, many of these to mitigate against UK government welfare policies, including the bedroom tax, the benefit cap, and so on. So, to conclude, our Cash First plan is an important step along the journey that we would all like to take to make sure that there is no longer a need for food banks in this country. But it's only one step of our journey that also includes the wider work on poverty and also our call on others to step up to the plate to fulfil their obligations. But it is an ambition that we should all remain absolutely committed to. There should be no need for food banks in a Scotland that we live in this day and age. The fact that there is a sign of failure, and it is absolutely our responsibility and my responsibility within government to do everything we can to work with the third sector and others to make sure that there is a future with no food banks needed in Scotland. Thank you.
And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much to Polly and everyone at the team for having me here. So I could talk a little bit about minimum income guarantee, but I suppose as part of that, the wider social security infrastructure and safety net that we have in Scotland, and I suppose importantly actually across the UK, because so much of our social security is still tied to the UK system. But to start, I suppose the obvious place, we keep talking about a minimum income guarantee. What is it? It's a really simple but transformational concept of you have an income floor beneath which no one can fall. So for most people, paid work and collective services like childcare and health and education and social care will bring people up to that level. However, for many more, they won't. And as such, it's right that social security and a targeted payment steps in. That can make a huge difference to people's lives, right across Scotland. So when designed, it can reduce poverty, inequality and insecurity, regardless, importantly, of your work status. It ensures that people can feed themselves and live their lives with dignity, as Shirley-Anne and others have spoken about. And I think really importantly, it literally has the potential in a hypothetical way, because I could very easily get into a debate, and if there was any economists in the room, they would get into a debate about the fact that you cannot eradicate poverty because the poverty line will just shift. But on the basis of where the poverty line is right now, you could eradicate poverty with a minimum income guarantee. But why is it needed? At its absolute most basic level, social security levels are ultimately arbitrary. You can go right back to the 40s, 50s, when the social security system as we know it first came into proper existence. And even then, they were set arbitrarily. They've been increased, decreased, frozen, everything else, but again, arbitrarily. And they have no meaningful relation whatsoever to genuine cost of living. And in the past 50 years, for the most part, core benefit levels, they have been increased by inflation. Now, that's an established mechanism for operating benefits, but again, it's one that's also far removed from what we've seen in wage growth. So what that means, that as time has gone on, for the most part, living standards for those who are unemployed in particular have grown more slowly for those in work because wage growth has outstripped inflation. But actually, it's not just about an issue of being in work or out of work. Those who do, for whatever reason, lose their jobs will then in turn face larger income drops over time, and you see a decline in financial security and economic security. So Omega is about addressing that lack of financial security. So you take an issue like food insecurity and the rise of food bank, that is ultimately an issue of poverty. So 35% of all people living in poverty in Scotland this year have marginal, low or very low food security. But it goes beyond poverty as well, for a reason I'll come back to in a second. So out of all people in Scotland, not just those that are living in poverty, more than 1 in 10 have low, marginal or poor food security in Scotland. So you can see how it's not just about that poverty line, and it goes far beyond that. And ultimately, what our social safety net does is it barely keeps people's heads above water. And actually, for many, it legislates them to live in poverty and financial insecurity. So Omega starts to fundamentally address that really important link between income and costs. So I'm going to try and not get too tacky or wonky. I do work for a think tank. It's always a risk. I apologise. But right now, for example, if you are a single person with 1 primary and 1 secondary age child living in Scotland, you're deemed to be living in poverty if you have income of less than £360 a week. But that measure it's not meaningless, because I will never say that poverty measures are meaningless, but that measure basically goes, here's everyone's income, here's the median of all those incomes, and then here's 60% of that median figure, and you're deemed to be living in poverty if you're beneath that. But that is divorced from the reality of what it actually takes to run a household budget and keep your head above water, and more importantly, lead a dignified life, because it's devoid of costs. So instead, there's an alternative measure that we can look at called minimum income standards. That's a measure that's based on research undertaken by researchers at the University of Loughborough, and importantly engages lots of members of the public in kind of deliberative panel to look at what's actually included, in a minimum household budget. What do you actually need to live that dignified life? And if you use that same measure that same lone parent household with a primary and a secondary age child would need £821 a week income to live that dignified standard of life, compared, remember, to, I can't remember, £360 a week to be deemed living in poverty. So there is a huge disconnect in our social security system between the actual costs that people face and what we actually determine them to be living in poverty, or what we think that poverty actually is. We've got a really weird, at times, perception of what poverty is. And actually the reality of poverty is very different to people's lives.
I'm very briefly, because I'm only going to get 5 minutes, try and cover 3 areas. First, acknowledgements. I'll come back to that. Secondly, pay and work. And thirdly, tax. So very uplifting subjects. Acknowledgements. What do I mean by acknowledgements? I don't think that you can have a discussion, particularly one with the Scottish Government present, and not start by acknowledging the absolute disgrace of the Westminster Government in terms of its attitude towards poverty. I think just yesterday, the UN said we're in breach of human rights because of poverty. We have a Home Secretary who says that homelessness is a lifestyle choice. We have a cabinet which no doubt at this very moment is trying to think whether even in the financial crisis that we're in, whether it can stuff a few more quid down the back pockets of those better off people to support them in their party. And that acknowledgement's important because we do have a respectful but robust critical engagement with the Scottish Government where we seek to push them further on pay, on free school meals, on a whole range of issues. But without that acknowledgement, and I really have absolutely no sympathy and no patience with people who don't accept that that's the paradigm that the Scottish Government is working in. And I do want to acknowledge that some of the initiatives, the two-child benefit cap, the commitments to childcare, these are the right priorities. Now, we will always say go further, and we hope that we'll come up with some ideas about how to go further, but we don't have a genuine problem with the priorities, and we don't have any doubt about the context and the environment in which the Scottish Government is working. Having said that, because you know there was a but coming, we do think that the level of crisis that we're in just now is such that the difficult choices that we're going to have to make over the next period have to be faced up to. They have to be faced up to government, but frankly, they have to be faced up to by all political parties. And I shall touch on that when I come back to the council tax. But the first thing I want to talk about just briefly is work. We all know, and I hope it's accepted as unnecessary for me to say that what we've already heard about those who aren't in work and who are in food poverty are an absolute priority for our organisation. But we represent hundreds of thousands of people who are in work and suffering these conditions, and hundreds of thousands of people who are in and out of work, and probably most importantly, hundreds of thousands of people whose work is not secure enough and does not pay enough. And I want to acknowledge again the progress that we have made on the Scottish Living Wage. But I also need to say that the Fair Work Convention just a few days ago, maybe a week ago, has said that there's still an awful lot of progress that we need to make. 0 hours contracts have increased in Scotland over the last period, and 0 hours contracts are the bane of people's lives when it comes to managing their life and managing their food and managing their future. We still have an awful long way to go on the disability employment gap. The indicators are the wrong direction when it comes to the disability employment gap. So we really need to redouble our efforts on fair work in Scotland. We'd love to see employment laws evolved. We'd love to see the Scottish Government being really annoyed by us because there'd be even more that we could do together to deliver on that. But there are things that we can do, and establishing government conditionality that ensures that some of these indicators go the other way is absolutely vital. Now, we do need to talk about tax because many of the...
In 1 minute.
In 1 minute. Many of the things that we're talking about now will come up against the funding issue. We didn't agree with the Scottish Government's freeze on the council tax. We didn't agree with it, not least because we think that the very poorest people aren't going to benefit and they will suffer detriment because of the services that they will lose. But also we have to have that conversation about changing it. And we have to start that conversation not in 3 or 4 years' time up to the next election, but now. It starts with a council tax re-evaluation. It starts with challenging every party in the Parliament to come together with the government to agree that there should be changes. There should be no point scoring when it comes to council tax. It's a very hard thing to do, but it has to happen. Even now, if we started the process now, it would take 3 or 4 years ago. Longer term, we need property taxes that will shift the burden from income to assets. There's far too much money tied up in assets, and that's costing our people far too much money. So that's a quick run around. There's things we think the Scottish Government can do in the budget this year, but we also need to be looking 3 or 4 years hence to how we change the way that we pay for our services and how we tax wealth in this country.
Not everybody knows how many disabled people there are in Scotland, because people have a concept of disabled people that they use wheelchairs or have a white stick. But actually there's 1.1 million disabled people in Scotland. That's people either with an impairment of some sort, sensory, mental health, learning difficulties, mobility problems, etc. 1.1 million people. And research by the disability charity Scope found that their average additional costs to cope with their disability, to bring them up to the same standard of living as a non-disabled person, were £975 a month. But that was back in 2019. They've risen since then to over £1,100 a month. So the additional costs to a disabled person, this is going back to what Philip was talking about, that poverty doesn't take into account those additional costs other than housing. So for disabled people to reach the same standard of living is much, much harder. And because of that, and because of their exclusion from the workforce, because less than half of disabled people in Scotland are in work, of working age, because of that, 40% of the children in Scotland who are living in poverty come from a household that contains either a disabled adult or child. So 1/5 of the population, but 40% of all the children living in poverty. And once the extra costs of disability are taken into account, it rises to nearly 1 in 2. In other words, nearly 50% of all those living in poverty in the UK come from a household with a disabled person or child in it. So disabled people are at the highest risk of destitution. Destitution is when you haven't got food on the table, fuel to heat yourself, adequate clothing, or a roof over your head. And JRF completed a survey for 2022. 63% of those responding to the survey, a very large survey, 63% of those responding were disabled people who had been destitute in the year 2022-23. So huge numbers of disabled people unable to feed themselves, unable to heat their homes adequately. Not even a choice in some cases between eating and heating, able to do neither. And I think that the Trussell Trust and IFANs on statistics show, again, 3 out of 4 Scots who approach food banks come from a household with a disabled person in it. So, we've got a huge problem that we need to tackle in terms of disabled people's poverty. And I think we've already talked about some of the solutions. One of them is very definitely to do more to ensure that disabled people can claim all the benefits that they're entitled to, both devolved and reserved. There's approximately 2 billion in unclaimed benefits in Scotland. And if we could get half of that money into the hands of those who need it, we'd be a long way to reducing poverty down to the levels that we want to see it at. And I really commend the Scottish Government for investing in welfare rights in primary care settings, because guess what? Disabled people are more likely to use GP surgeries, you'll see health visitors, etc. So if you can make an immediate referral to a welfare rights advisor in that setting, what the research in the deep end surgeries in the poorest areas of Glasgow found was that over 70% of those who used the welfare rights services had never approached advice services before. And they got an average of nearly £7,000 extra for each person that was referred to the service. So the Trussell Trust research on disability benefits showed few disabled people are aware of advocacy services that are available in law. That every disabled person in Scotland has a right, when they're claiming a Scottish Social Security benefit, to get advocacy support. We need to do much, much more to make disabled people aware of those services so that they can get what's due to them. And because disabled people, on average, spend much, much more on fuel because they're at home more often and because of their conditions, we need to see much more done to tackle fuel poverty so that people can make a genuine choice to eat as well as heat their homes. So we're calling on an increase in the winter heating payment from £50 to £100. That would help 400,000 low-income households, 200,000 plus of which have a disabled adult or child in them. And lastly, and I'm very glad to see this, there is going to be a review of ADP. We really need to look at the adequacy of disability benefits and see, again, whether they're doing the job that they're supposed to do and meeting those extra costs that disabled people face. And we also need to look at the entitlement criteria to make sure that all the disabled people that are entitled to the benefit are getting it. And I do think we need to expand the welfare rights provision into schools as well as primary care settings, because there are a lot of disabled children and parents of disabled children who aren't getting all that they're entitled to.
Thanks so much to you all for being here today. I wonder if you could cast your minds back 15 years to what you were doing in 2008 and now try to remember what the world looks for you around you just then. Do you remember hearing about countless numbers of food banks, about children going to school hungry? Do you remember hearing about bed poverty, fuel poverty, digital poverty, period poverty, or food poverty? Do you remember feeling that the situation couldn't get worse and then it does? If in 2008 we lived in a society with just a handful of food banks, then surely it's within our reach to eliminate the need for sticking plaster responses. Many of you are working at the epicentre of Scotland's poverty crisis. You know only too well the damage that's being inflicted on people of all ages. You know only too well that this damage could take decades to repair. We can and we must put the food bank genie back in its bottle. Food banks want nothing more than for their help not to be needed. The Scottish Government has certainly made history with its plan, but since the draft was first published in October 2021, the goalposts have moved, and as you know, poverty and deprivation have soared. Latest data from both IFAN and the Trussell Trust is devastating. Liz Williams told me last week about the increases the Galashiels and Area Food Bank is seeing, about the evening slot they've put in place to support people who are in work. Many of you know firsthand that Liz's experience is typical, and we'll hear from Joyce and Bethany in a moment. But most people struggling to afford food or skipping meals due to lack of money don't access a food bank. Food bank data is the veritable tip of the iceberg. And there's also been a game-changing shift over the last 18 months. Food bank teams have been reaching breaking point, both physically and mentally. Many independent food bank teams are overburdened and overstretched. Demand is outstripping donations, and surplus food supplies have dwindled. This has left some volunteers in the unthinkable position of having to decide how emergency food support should be rationed. And volunteers are trying to support people facing increasingly complex situations. In many cases, no amount of time and goodwill will make a difference. Food bank teams are exhausted and feeling demoralised. The situation is unsustainable. And food parcels can only ever alleviate food insecurity. The plan towards ending the need for food banks is ambitious, yes, but far greater commitments are required both from Westminster and the Scottish Government. Only then can we realistically look towards a future where everyone can afford essentials and everyone is allowed the dignity to make their own choices. Of course, Westminster must take on its responsibilities. The UK government must ensure that universal credit matches the cost of living, and it must remove the punitive elements of an already threadbare social security system, including the 5-week wait, deductions, sanctions and the 2-child limit. Westminster certainly holds many of the levers for change, but Scotland can take greater strides towards reducing poverty. The increase in the Scottish child payment to £25 has been very welcome, but the Scottish Government must go further, be bolder and increase that payment. Adult and child disability payments must be increased in line with inflation too. The recent review of the Scottish Welfare Fund told us what we already knew. The enviable support mechanism must be well funded, properly promoted and adequately administered in every local authority in Scotland. Far greater investment is critical. And as you've heard, it's vital that precarious work is reduced and that a real living wage and real living hours are prioritised and promoted across Scotland. And as you've also heard, commitment to the establishment of a minimum income guarantee is key. The conflation of food waste and food poverty, those problems must end at the first mention of a cash-first approach from our perspective. Institutionalising the redistribution of surplus food cannot ever provide an effective solution to people's lack of income. And action at a local level is fundamental. The Scottish Government's investment in cash-first partnerships is invaluable, as well as their support of IFAN's Worrying About Money leaflets. Local collaboration across sectors to prioritise a cash-first approach is critical, alongside investment in local advice services. Momentum built locally is already making a difference. We know what drives poverty. We know what drives food insecurity. We know what drives the need for food banks, and we know what drives the need for charitable food aid in its myriad of forms.
A little bit about Bethany. Bethany's the director of Edinburgh Food Project right here in this city, a local charity offering a money advice service and running 7 food bank centres across the city. Edinburgh Food Project has been a member of the Trussell Trust network since it opened in 2012. And having joined the Edinburgh Food Project as a volunteer herself, Bethany's moved on to become their first volunteer manager before taking over from the founder of the charity as a director in 2017. She's also a trustee for Volunteer Edinburgh. So, Bethany, what do you make of what our panel have said?
Thank you very much, and it was lovely hearing. I need to apologise, I have a cold. I don't sound like this all the time. It was lovely hearing from everybody, and I think it was especially really interesting hearing from Shirley-Anne about actually that admittance that the system has failed, because it has, and I think we all know that, and actually hearing it out loud is really nice, rather than it coming from us all the time. And I think you were talking about the cash first and crisis grants and giving people vouchers and giving people cash in a crisis, and why don't we just give people enough money in the first place to ensure that they never actually fall into a crisis in the first place? When do you know, Bill was talking about £2 billion in unclaimed benefits for people living with disabilities. Do you know, we had somebody we've worked with her, it took us a year to get her from universal credit onto the enhanced PIP payment. She got £14,000 in back payment and another £15,000 for the year coming of what she would have got. Why did we have to do that? Why was the system so complicated and so difficult that she couldn't do that on her own? Why did we make it so convoluted that she had to access a food bank and then access a maximisation service in a food bank in the first place? And I think I agree with everything you've said. I'm not disagreeing, I'm just saying there is so much more, and I think we need to strip a lot of it back, take away a lot of the jargon. One thing I talk about a lot is it's fuel poverty, food poverty, period poverty. It's poverty. If you can't afford any of them, you're living in poverty. And I think we tart up things and we make it sound interesting, and we make it sound exciting, and actually we just don't give people enough money to live on. I really welcome the income guarantee. I think I don't know enough, but you know, from your 5 minutes, I'm sold. I'm really interested in what you were talking about, and I think you know, it's not fair to just stand here and say we need to do more, because we are doing so much more than the other nations in the UK. We can't deny that. The child payment has been a huge lifeline for people, but nearly 50% of people that come to our food banks are single people. They're not people with children. We know that 3 out of 4 are living in a household with a disability, so we're making headway in some areas, but there's so much more work to do. Yeah, and I think for me and my experience and what we're seeing in Edinburgh is we just have to give people the money they're entitled to the first time. They shouldn't have to jump through hoop after hoop after hoop and end up at a food bank for one of us to sort it for them. It should happen the first time.